I will call to order the Torch Lake Township Zoning Ordinance Steering Committee meeting of December 15th, 2021 at 6:15. The primary purpose of this meeting is to discuss the agenda items that are listed. Our first item on the agenda is public comment. We have no public, therefore no comment. Our next item is approval of the agenda. You have the agenda in front of you.
I can hear better.
You can hear better without them?
Yeah.
Okay. We've got 5 items. Some of them are pretty big, so we'll work to stay within the 2.5 or 2 hours of time. Are there any changes to the agenda? If there are none, I'll make the motion to accept the agenda as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Having a second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we'll move to the next item, which will be the approval of November 17th, 2021 minutes. Are there any questions or changes to the minutes? Hearing none, then I'll make the motion to accept the minutes as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, they're moved and seconded to accept the minutes as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Right, our first item of the business is General Provisions, Article 2, and Sarah, we'll let you start.
Okay. So yeah, we stopped just after Article 1 last time. So Article 2, the first couple sections are just kind of standard zoning language, about how we do zoning, what it's applicable to, if items are conflicting with other sections of the ordinance. Does anybody have any comments or corrections? I guess this is on page, I have it as 3 of 18. I'm assuming, does everybody have them numbered like
Yep.
that? Okay.
I did have a question, not particular to this, but that is the planning commission right now is working on several items. And how is that going to fold into what we're doing?
Any of those items will get put into this draft before they see it or as they become effective.
Okay.
I only had a couple things like non-conforming uses. Are we going to include things like, buildings? Do you want to look through the fine print on this or just look at the main concepts of each of the paragraphs?
I think looking at the concepts for each, non-conforming, this language is similar to what we just adopted into the zoning ordinance. There are a few changes to it from what's in the current ordinance. But I think in general for non-conforming uses, and that's in Article 10, that's coming up. So if we have that concept, so the law for non-conforming uses allows the township to go as far as to say, you can't do anything to them and it is what it is, or you can go and be very kind of lenient towards it and allow them to completely demolish them and rebuild them in the same place even.
So it keeps it neutral.
So this is kind of a balance. Article 10 is kind of a balance between that, where there's some reconstruction allowed, but if you voluntarily demolish it, you can't rebuild it. Something that's unique about this ordinance too, let me get there. I was up at the beginning of chapter 2.
Yeah, no, I was just using 2.2A.
Oh, okay.
Because I highlighted non-conforming,
2.2.
just throwing out there. Because I think all we're trying to do is say, what's the effect of zoning, right?
Right. I see. I'm sorry. I misunderstood what you were asking. I think that this is how it is, except for non-conforming uses. And then
That's
See
a whole
chapter
new-
10.
Got it. All right. So I had nothing on 2.2. I don't know if anybody else did.
Nope.
Okay.
2.3 then? Okay. That asterisk is just a typo situation. Okay.
All right. Yep.
Page
good.
4 is more just kind of explaining everything. So fractional measurements, if you only have a half, if you round up or down. 2.5 brings in the land division ordinance. We just adopted that ordinance. It's a separate ordinance that stands by itself, but this, just kind of ties it all back together. 2.6 talks about barrier-free and ADA accessibility, so that you are allowed to modify your building to comply with that if necessary. 2.8 talks about relocation of buildings. So this does allow you to relocate them, but they have to meet all of the requirements of the ordinance. And then 2.9 talks about the demolition of buildings, and what is required with that. The big thing here related to demolition of buildings is this gives us a little bit of teeth for if somebody demos a building but doesn't follow through all the way to the end. They either leave the foundation, they leave a hole, they don't seed it. So this demolition section tells everybody that, you have to follow through basically until the end.
Yep.
So that's a little bit more than what currently exists. 2.10, temporary buildings during construction. So this has to do with construction offices that they are allowed. It seems like a little bit of an overkill, but it's a question that we get asked a lot. Our current ordinance does not talk about this type of building. A lot of times it's kind of the assumption it will be on site while you're doing construction, but here it's clear when, how, and what that looks like. And then 2.11, temporary dwellings during construction. This comes from the existing ordinance. This language does. It allows you to live in a mobile home or a recreational vehicle, I should say, but it could be any other structure too during construction of another house. Does anybody have any questions, concerns on this one?
G just seemed weird to me. If a RV is a temporary dwelling, why should I have to have a permitted septic system to live in that?
Right. And it may be that they're trying to get you to install the permanent one that you're going to be, say you're building a house, that you'd have to put that in first. But I do kind of agree, because if you have an RV that's self-contained, you don't necessarily need a septic on site for that. Or water for it either. So I don't know if we'd want to, you could either remove that item G altogether, or we could,
Item G, you said?
yeah, or we could say if the dwelling is not self-contained, then there shall be some sort of facilities. That could be an option too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me just make a note here real quick.
Unless we're all good with outhouses. Then just take it out.
That or get Gamosiers in there with the temporary.
Okay. 2.12 talks about encroachments into the setbacks. So item A allows for patios and decks, things that are unroofed, to be in the setback no more than 5 feet. And then B talks about eaves and gutters can be no more than 2 feet into it. So essentially, we're measuring to the foundation of a structure, the setback.
So we're changing the way we measure from the drip line to
Right.
the foundation.
That this does propose that. That was my next comment, was that currently we measure to the drip line. So you can do it either way. The current ordinance is not crystal clear to me on how you measure it.
I would agree, but I think generally agreed it was the drip line. That's
Yeah.
what we've been using.
Yeah, so, if you would, that's completely fine with me, so we would just change this and say that, I would take out then the eaves, we probably add some language also about, in a different section, that the setbacks measured to, the drip line.
I don't know that one is preferable over the other. Does anybody else have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I just was talking with a homeowner recently about this exact thing because his neighbor has a home that was built and the overhang to the eave is into the setback. And he was upset about that. And I said, and it was a 2 foot, maybe 1.5 foot overhang. And I said, well, what does it matter to you if that is up there 2 stories and is a foot into the setback? I don't think it matters if it's the drip line makes as much sense as anything, because it doesn't, to me, it doesn't affect that much. I'm sure there'd be a case where it would, but for the basic ordinance of how far you can encroach into a setback, to me, that's one of the least important factors. The more important factor would be at ground level where it affects people. So I don't have a problem with the drip line being, the setback, either way, if it's the setback goes to the foundation and you're allowed a drip line into the setback, or the setback is right, well, right now it's up to the drip line. So I don't have a problem. And the more I think about it, the more I gotta go measure my own house too.
I know.
That
Yeah.
mansion of yours.
Yeah, well,
Well,
I wouldn't call it that, but.
this goes back to the case with Bill Stridiron, when he wanted to do the high water mark. This was the White House across at the far end of Torch Lake. And when the zoning administrator first measured, here's where your 50 foot is. And when they remeasured, it was separate and it was actually encroaching by the overhang. And it was required that they remove it. So if we just kind of go with the foundation, in my opinion, and then if they want to have 1 or 2 or, I don't think you're going to have a very big overhang in the north with the snow the way it is.
Yeah.
So however you want to do that, but.
The nice thing about measuring to a foundation is there's no going out there and standing and trying to figure out
Right.
where that overhang comes to. If we're coming down to inches,
I was going to agree with that it'd make it easier to, for you or for the ZBA if they have to check something to measure if it was to the foundation.
Okay.
By switching it to the foundation, would that create nonconformity?
No, it should alleviate some nonconformity potentially. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll try it. We'll see if the planning commission has any huge objection to it, or the rest of the township board when we get all the way through it. So C talks about enclosed porches are treated just like everything else, and that there should be no encroachments into the waterfront setback. So that D takes away that that measurement right to the eave or to the foundation. On the water side, they would be required to measure to the drip edge. So I'm thinking for consistency, it may be easier to say everything except for the 2 feet eave overhang. So then you could say, we're measuring the foundation all the way around instead of we measure to the foundation except for on the water, we measure to your drip edge.
Okay.
I have to make a comment. I was thinking about this as we go through this stuff. The burden of the implementation of this is going to fall on the planning commission. I mean, because they're going to have to go through the public hearings with all this stuff.
Right.
And based on our experience, we know what that may entail. So we just have to try to keep in mind that
Well, we
we
want to
don't
try
want
to
to create controversy if we can help it.
Yeah, we want to keep it simple and
Right.
consistent
Yeah.
as much as possible. Right, Laura?
Yes.
So then 2.13 talks about height exceptions. So this would be anything that allows for taller than, whatever our maximum height is for each district. Give me just a second. I want to check. If that is Antrim County Building Safety or if it's Antrim County something else. I want to double check that that's the proper name. So towers, architectural features, from religious institutions, and then chimneys can go above as well. So that's just making it clear.
Yeah.
2.14 talks about public uses. So these are pretty much your essential services, or what we typically call them or used to call them in ordinances. So the public uses, when you get into the definition section, which you haven't seen yet, spells out exactly what those different classifications are between that, but they are, well, we'll talk about them too in that chart to see what the approval process is in each district. So that just kind of talks about them a little bit. 2.15 talks about principal uses. You can only have one on a site. This is similar to the current ordinance. 2.16 accessory buildings. This also comes from the current ordinance. A lot of it does. There might be some language that's a little bit different, but the general policy and concept is the same as what's in the current ordinance.
I got a question that may not be applicable to this, but the subject of a carriage house. A carriage house is basically a garage with living quarters.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was always considered a dwelling
Mm-hmm.
and not an accessory building. And you can only have one dwelling on a property, but people are building carriage houses in Torch Lake Township.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand.
Yeah, so the current ordinance says that you can have a carriage house and it has no regulations.
It does?
Yes.
Okay.
So this ordinance does not call them carriage houses. I just call them accessory dwelling units because that's what they are. Like you
Right.
said, a carriage house, I think the carriage house comes from if we did have old carriage houses and people had them and wanted to continue to use them more so than building new ones, I think. And the Planning Commission quite a few months ago started talking about carriage houses and wanted to refine some of the language. And then I don't remember what happened, and they got off track and they come back to it to try to help with some of those regulations because it was being applied, it's an accessory building, so it had to be less than the main house, what it could have, different regulations, but it didn't actually say that in the ordinance. That was more of an interpretation of what the ordinance said. So I've left carriage houses out of this ordinance, and if we have anything that functions like that, it would be called an accessory dwelling unit.
So basically, they're just second dwellings on a
Right.
property.
Right.
So Okay, so that brings up a question I was going to ask later because I have a lot of the same questions and issues. But so on an R1 then that's a secondary dwelling. So we're actually permitting a
Mhm.
secondary dwelling on
Right.
an R1 lot.
Right. So, and I don't have that table up in front of me. Is that how I carried it over?
I don't think you included it, but
Okay.
I thought we
You
should
did
talk
not.
about it
Yeah.
when we got to the table. That's why I said
Yes.
later I was going to
Yep.
bring that up. but-
Yeah, that's where it would happen. So that is going to be kind of a tough discussion to figure out if you want to move forward one way or the other with it. I mean, there's every community goes through this because there's good arguments for allowing them and there's good arguments for not allowing accessory dwelling units in carriage houses. And, you know, they're definitely popular on the lake. And so that's usually why the discussions heat up a little bit too, on the lakefront property. So.
Well, my take was always that one of the reasons for not allowing two dwellings on a property was for rental purposes. It addressed the rental situation. They didn't want people, however, back before we were involved, they didn't want people building a second home to rent. That was one of the reasons. And of course, now our wonderful state legislature, along with our own state rep, who has sponsored the short-term rental legislation, they're really, well, we're going to be affected by that if it passes. So,
Well, I think it says in here that they're not to be rented. Doesn't it?
I think in the supplemental standards it does. I'd have to do.
I'm pretty sure it says it has to be used by, well, the owner has to live on the property and it can't be rented. Or it can be used by the owner, I guess,
Okay.
or their guests.
okay, yeah.
It doesn't, however the wording is, that was my impression that it couldn't be rented.
Well, the carriage
Yeah,
house,
well, we still got to get the short-term rentals. I didn't want to jump ahead. But
yeah,
Well, that law has not passed yet, right? It's
No.
just-
it's on hold.
Okay, so if it passes, that might kind of screw any of this up anyway.
Mhm. Right. And we do have, I mean, in our current zoning ordinance, we talk about short-term rentals and they're only allowed in certain zoning districts. So we do have that already in place and that would, I mean, depending on if we change anything here, but that would continue on until the state tells us we can't force that.
So I'm trying to remember, have we set the size for these accessory buildings? I mean, that's one way to control,
Right.
because I thought I was reading it couldn't be more than like 25% of the, is it 25?
800?
Not more than 800. So yeah, in Article 6, 7, it talks about for accessory dwellings.
Yep.
For just accessory buildings, we have no size limitations on them. If you want to just build a garage or a pole barn, that doesn't have a size. But if you want to do a second dwelling, that is limited to 800 square feet.
But isn't that how we're getting in trouble with the carriage house? They start out with a garage and then they go up.
Yeah, except for that, the ordinance doesn't have any language to help us with that.
So are we putting in language
Yeah,
now
so
that
this-
it has to stay? If you're building a garage, it's got to be as a garage and that's it.
Right. Unless you get a permit to change it to an accessory dwelling, and then you have to meet X, Y, and Z to be able to do that.
So you could still build a carriage house, but the living space above would be a maximum of 800 square feet. Am I understanding that correctly? Or not?
Right, to meet the accessory dwelling requirements, yes.
I didn't look back to make sure that 960 square
Mhm.
foot minimum doesn't apply.
That's,
Yeah.
'cause that's primary.
Right, right. It wouldn't apply. And I think, one of the reasons we make it less than that is because then they never could swap places. And you wouldn't ever the only thing about that though is that you couldn't really demolish the main house and just leave your garage dwelling then because it doesn't meet the requirements.
Well, okay, so you couldn't demolish that, but if you wanted to, say somebody bought a place with a small cottage on it
Mhm.
and they wanted to say, build the accessory
Carriage house.
carriage house, dwelling unit.
Mm-hmm.
They could build that, and then couldn't they get a permit to demolish and rebuild, their mansion?
Yeah.
Their lakefront mansion, like,
Right.
it's kind of what's happening, I think, more
Yeah.
typical of what's happening than
Yeah.
not.
So what would happen is we would, in that example, they would pull a permit to build a garage with the living above as an accessory dwelling unit, which would be permitted less than 800 square feet. Then they, would come in and they would pull a permit to demo their existing, rebuild their existing, and make their carriage house a temporary dwelling unit during construction. That has a 12-month limitation and all of that. And then once they get their house done and get occupancy, that temporary dwelling goes away, it just turns into back to carriage house, and you have your new home. So that would allow for that to happen.
Well, but right now, in that situation, which there is one right down the road from me, we forced those people to connect the two. They had to build a portico to connect the accessory building to the main house. There are two instances in my neighborhood that, one was when I was on the planning commission and we made them do that. And the other just happened recently, just down the road. And they're both nice looking places, but they were clearly full-fledged dwellings.
Oh, yeah, I don't really personally understand the connecting the two, how that changes anything to the use.
It was one building.
It was a way to get around.
They're treated as
But
one
then you
building.
still have two dwellings, then it becomes a duplex instead of a
Yeah, but
accessory.
this-
In my mind, if I'm
The
implying.
fact
it,
that
but-
they're connected made them one unit.
One unit.
So 2.16A addresses that, right? That says that if you did that, then you only have one
Right.
dwelling,
Right.
Right,
regardless of what that second one looks like, right?
right.
So we're not
Well, you'd still have,
clarifying the mud at all on this.
well, it still would be applicable to principal buildings. So it says that if you attach it, it's not an accessory building, it's your principal building. But your principal building still can only have a single dwelling unit. It can't have two dwelling units as a duplex. So, if you connect your guest house to your main house,
It's an addition. then,
right, kind of.
It's
I
an
mean,
addition and those people.
it depends on how it functions. If it has separate entrances, if it's got a full, kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, living, and it has a separate entrance that you don't have to go through the other house to, it's an attached dwelling unit to.
Do we want to care what people are doing in there? I don't know. Personally, I think it'd be, hey, sure. I can just imagine you've got all these kids coming back. There's no place to live. Their family. What's the big deal?
Right. Yeah, and that's the discussion related to housing.
Yeah.
Well, we can let the planning commission have their public hearing on this.
Yeah.
Just going back to your comment about the portico connecting two buildings, that language clearly states this states exactly that. That in 216A,
Right.
that would be one
Building.
part of the principal building. So it's basically the same approach that we've had all along in terms of what is considered a dwelling.
Okay, and then 2.17 talks about solar. So this is personal solar just for your residence or a commercial building. It's not a solar farm or anything like that. So these have the requirements. So this is new to the ordinance. In the past, we probably have just dealt with them as an accessory building or an accessory structure. So they'd have to meet setbacks and whatnot. So here we have a little bit more details about what it is saying.
So for this, for 2.17, how does it relate back to 2.13? as far as height goes. So as of, for instance, 2.13A says that you can exceed the maximum height.
Mm-hmm.
And so in reality, somebody could have a 2-story, 35-foot, and then pack on solar panels on top of that to get to like 40 or 45 feet. Am I reading that right?
So, well, the solar could not go higher than whatever the zoning district has.
All right, but let's just assume, because it 2.13 talks about walls that can extend beyond the maximum height by up to 5 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm trying to, and I know this appears to be associated with maybe commercial where you've got units, but for this particular thing, the height for the solar panel could actually go beyond the 35-foot limit if we look at R1. Now, I know
2.17A1, doesn't that restrict it to the maximum allowed height for the structure?
right, but there's an exception over there in 2.13A.
So you're thinking that the solar panels would fit into that item A, 2.13A?
Yeah, I'm thinking somebody could say, hey, I get an extra 5 feet here.
Because it's roof mounted mechanical equipment?
Yeah,
So we could say, except for solar panels. In 2.13A, we could exclude specifically solar panels.
that's fine, because anything roof mounted, I would think, would have to be an exception. Or more clearly define 2.13 as more commercial related as opposed to, because it's talking about roof mounted mechanical equipment. It just talks to commercial in my mind as opposed to any R1.
Right.
But solar panels could be viewed as mechanical equipment.
Well, and I guess it would depend on, does that matter or not to you? Because, and I don't remember what I put in here.
Well, I'll just tell you, it doesn't matter to me. I'm concerned with it being possibly a confusing type of issue if somebody wanted to oppose something and pulled these two things together.
Yeah. So I think putting excluding roof mounted mechanical equipment, excluding solar panels, for 2.13, so that it's clear there's no conflict between the language. I think that makes sense.
Right.
You could take out 2.17A1, that height requirement, and allow them to go taller if you wanted to encourage people to put them on their roof, even though the roof is at the maximum height. So this ordinance doesn't do it here specifically, but, and I don't remember in the commercial either. A lot of the ordinances for the commercial, I say if you put them on top of a building, it's permitted by right, but if you put it on the ground, it's a special use permit, because on it encourages people to put them on top of already impervious surface instead of making more.
Yep.
So you could take that height limitation out, but then you may get something crazy too. So you probably should go back to no more than 5 feet. But,
Well, however, we can make it a little simpler.
okay.
Give it a
Yeah.
shot. Because then I look down at number 3, A3 under 2.17.
Mm-hmm.
And the question here, it's limiting what side of the house you can put it on, but not what happens if the house is facing the north or something.
Right.
So are there any exceptions to that? Or is it that, hey, if your house faces the wrong way, that's too bad?
That's what, I mean, I found that in a lot of communities, people are somehow offended by solar panels on roofs along the roads. So
People are, I'm sorry.
offended, so they don't want them on the roadside. Personally, I'm like, wherever you want to put them, I don't care. But that is something we see a lot of times, is that they don't want them on the roadside, or they're concerned maybe there would be glare from them onto the road. But typically on the roof, you wouldn't get that glare. Like when they're down on the ground and closer, you can get topography that you get a glare. But, they're meant to absorb light, not reflect light. So I have no problem taking that "but" through the end of the sentence off if you have if you don't mind them being on the roadside. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Laura
Yeah,
likes
I
it.
mean,
What?
I would remove it. I
Oh, all right.
looked at that too.
I don't know
It's not
that I
fair
would,
if you're
but
out of luck.
I guess I'm in the camp of, I think it's kind of ugly from the road.
Yeah.
Well,
But it does restrict,
it tells people you can't have solar power for your house.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's going to be in the front yard. And again, if the goal is to go more green, then we're going to have to make it,
Mm-hmm.
and at least this way the PC can let it go to a public hearing and see what the public says.
Right.
So I agree. I think I want to
Okay.
take it out if possible.
Okay. I agree. I mean, I think that's definitely the way everything's kind of turning, that green comment that you made, Bob. So, and then we've got ground mounted, which is next for solar. So that's still residential use. This does talk about placement on the street facing side yards for corner lots shall be prohibited. Do you have an opinion on take it out, or it says?
Yeah, the height of a ground-mounted unit at 16 feet, that's almost 2 stories.
Yeah, it's a story and a half.
Well, maybe in
Plus.
your neighborhood. We have normal houses in my neighborhood.
Now I've seen your house.
Well, a story and a half, okay. That's still pretty tall.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That number comes from, some of these are pretty big units. Some of them with the sun to allow that to happen.
I got to admit, I've never seen a ground-mounted home solar unit.
Yeah.
Have you?
Not locally. You see them a lot in ads and things of that
Wow.
sort, but they're usually out there in the prairie or something. It's not like because if you look at a lot of our property, it's surrounded by trees and stuff. You're not going to have a
Yeah.
lot of options as to where you put it. But that was going to be part of my question is, depending on where the sun is, could very well drive where that unit has to be. Now, do people want to put something in their front yard? But on the other hand, if you're facing the lake, street side, they're not going to care if it's back there. But people might. Again, it's what's front, and what's back.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, I would say that most of, when you look at the larger solar arrays, like the ones they put in by the wind turbine out on 72 over by West Bay there. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've been by those. Those are, the back sides of those are about 10 or 11 feet off the ground. They don't move, they're fixed. And the ones they put in, if you go out 31 towards Frankfurt, past Interlock, or right by Interlock in there, Cherryland put in some panels there, and those are similar. It's a smaller field.
well, King's Farm
the
on
ones on
Erickson.
Creswell.
So I was trying to think of one
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
here.
Those are probably 8 foot would be my guess. I haven't stood out there, but they're
Yeah.
big units.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you want that glaring across the street from you, but
So do you
I
think
don't know.
16 is too high then?
Hmm?
You think 16 feet's too high?
I do, but I guess,
No, I would say that, I mean, 16 feet, I would think you're talking commercial as opposed to a residential.
Is that going to be, it's 16 feet at the highest point and it's going to go all the way to the ground? Is that how they're all built? It's not like it's going to be up in the air at 16 feet so that so it can get to some sun?
Yeah,
or-
it could. Some of them sit just on a single pole and then they have like a square array that sits on the top of them.
Yeah.
Those ones most often move when they have them like that.
to catch the sun better, yeah.
Yeah, and so those are a little bit taller because it's instead of having, where it's long and kind of skinny, where you might have two panels back to back, those square ones have, I think there are 3 or 4 panels, to make them more square. Because they can't go as long, so they do get taller, so they need more clearance. I'm trying to think of where I've seen those at. My experience, like they put them in at Bringman Brothers over in Elmwood Township. That's how I know about the square ones. The winery over there, they put them in, which is kind of half ag though too. So people, it's not on your commercial strip or in a neighborhood, so it's a little bit different having it in the ag district than sitting on the lake where they move around. What I can do, I made a note here to check on this height to see, I'd hate to make it too limiting to somebody if they want to put them in, but maybe we can move that down a little bit or something that's not too restrictive, still allow you to do it, but maybe not be as tall. I can get back.
I guess one of my questions be as a for instance, just assuming just general discussion. At the air park, if the owner wanted to run his whole facility with solar panels, he could put a ton of solar panels along 31.
Mhm.
Because that would be east, southeast facing. And so the question then becomes, are we going to have restrictions as far as commercial or the size? I know we discussed about farms in here, but I didn't really see a whole lot of meat on it.
Right. This would be for personal use. So, on-site consumption. So if the airport put in solar panels to support their operations, they would go under this section. If they put in solar panels purely to sell it back to the power company, then they'd be the commercial, and that would be in a different section of the ordinance.
Or they could sell it back to the residents, right? Could they
Well,
do
it
that?
has to be on site. So no, like if you put in a system and you can feed it back into the grid, we wouldn't limit that, but the intent is to use it on site.
Just for one house.
One for one house, one business, one it could be a commercial operation. It could be a farm, or it could be, Eastport Market,
Right.
So
He could
if
put 'em
we're
out
looking-
front.
If we're looking specifically at the air park, you're saying that would be considered personal?
if he's only going to use them for that site to power something at the airport. But as soon as if you were to put it in, say the airport put them in and then was going to sell the power to each of the,
Property owners,
Even
The
lease-
hangars.
Yeah, the hangars.
yeah.
that would be commercial. That would
Okay,
not fit
okay.
into this personal use because that's not on site. Because those are all individual parcels. Those hangars are. Just like you couldn't put it in on the airport and then sell it to each of the houses because that's not for on site.
Okay. We beat that up.
Okay. Ready to move on to 2.18?
Wait.
Sure.
Excuse me, I gotta go to number 6 under the ground mount. It said, I must have misunderstood you, but said excess energy generated may be sold to the utility company.
Mhm.
So would that then make it, if he does that, that makes it commercial?
No, that would allow, if it's excess for your site. So in the definition of personal solar energy systems, which you don't have those definitions yet, it'll say personal solar, is intended to serve the site. The kilowatts that you're providing
Okay.
are anticipated should be similar to whatever you're
So if he
using.
puts a solar energy, somebody puts a solar energy system in specifically to sell that,
Right,
then that's commercial.
yes.
Okay.
So what's preventing somebody from putting massive solar, using it on site, but selling, 75 or 80% of it back, overkill, putting more than they need on? Is there anything that prevents that from happening? And basically building a carriage house bigger than their own
Yeah.
house? I mean, the same issue that we faced, there's,
So it doesn't really say that in here. We could add at the beginning in that opening paragraph something about similar to what I was just talking about. We could, as a part of the permit application, you could say, we need to know how much power you're intending to collect so that we can compare to see if that's what you actually need. A typical household uses a certain amount of kilowatts, or your commercial business uses a certain amount. So then, you could have 10% more or something if you wanted to, or you were worried about people putting in too big of solar arrays.
I think it might make sense to have something like that in there.
Okay.
Do
Yep.
the energy companies limit what they'll take from you?
I don't know what the current, what their current thought on it is. Sometimes they'll let you sell, sometimes they won't. Depends on the utility company.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But, I can check on that. And I think it still would be good to have that limit, because if all of a sudden the power company is like, oh, we'll take it all, then people may try to get in business of that. I don't know if they'll go back to that, or probably depending on how much green energy they need, right? If you can start getting money back from people.
Yeah,
so.
you never know if the utility company is going to change their policies.
Yeah.
Well, we also need to be able to give the planning commission a little guideline about what we batted around so that they can take it to the next step with the public.
Yeah, and this is a new use. It's not something that's in our current ordinance. So to have a little bit more in-depth conversation makes sense related to it. Okay, so personal wind energy systems. So again, these are just for home use, the smaller towers, and what they're allowed to have. This is less text than what's in your current ordinance.
Yeah, we got 4 pages.
We still have a bunch of language for commercial wind energy systems, so that's not going away. So this is only if, at a house you want to put this on, or at a farm or something like that. You have to have at least 3 acres. So that's the most limiting, and then the height and things like that. So I don't know if you want to full on encourage these the most you can, or if you want to tighten it up a little bit and pull some more standards in.
We've been 110 feet, right? That's what, 11 stories.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure even on 3 acres if that disappears.
It doesn't. The issue is that, if you have trees that are 60 feet tall, to get over the trees, if you want it, you could bring that down some if you felt that 110. Most of them are not that tall, kind of like cell phone towers too. When they're just the one-off cell phone tower, they're just not as tall as that, but
Geez,
Well-
you'd think the taller they are, the less people would care.
yeah.
You don't even notice it's there.
Right.
I was going to even say like less than 3 acres, like
Yeah.
one for everybody. Whoever wants one. have one.
Well, I think we found that they haven't really, and it could change, but it's not like every person has one still. even
No.
in communities where they don't have the restrictions, it's still very limited to who actually has one.
Yeah.
It could change,
Somebody
maybe.
needs to make it cool. There needs
Yeah.
to be a song.
Yeah. It seems like it's been a push
Well,
for a long
It
time.
seems to me that would be a more effective green energy source in our climate than
Yes.
than a
Right.
solar panel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, any questions, comments on 2.18? Okay, 2.19, power generators, this is new. These are, those backup power generators that are connected to the house, that it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue. People complain about the noise, where they're located, those types of things. So typically, communities either don't get involved at all, or they treat them as an accessory structure. This calls them out specifically, so we know how to deal with them. Can't be in the setbacks. And then they do have to be screened from the right of way.
They have to be what, from the right of way?
Screened,
Okay.
so you wouldn't be able to see them on the road right of way side.
So I assume we're talking about ones that are permanently there.
Yes.
Is there anything in here that says that? I mean,
That it's
'cause nobody's
permanent?
gonna throw a fit about me pulling out my backup generator and running it and not having it blocked off, hidden while I use it.
I will add the word permanent in front of backup at the beginning of that sentence so that it's crystal clear. Yes.
So we passed this, is somebody that has a generator that faces a road, are they gonna have to screen it?
No, that would be non-conforming.
I figured that, but
Yeah.
I just,
No, it's a good question because people will ask that. Okay, fences. Fences. So this section looks a lot different than your current fence section of your ordinance. And I did my best to try to uncomplicate the fences because I find the current regulations very difficult to deal with. It does have, it's boiled down. So currently your ordinance talks about no taller than 8 feet in height, no taller than 4 feet in height within 50 feet of the high water mark. All of these things are what's in there. So
I'm gonna use this opportunity when you mentioned the high water mark. Years ago, the high water mark was only used for Great Lakes. Inland lakes never used the terminology high water mark. When did that change?
I think that it's, as more time goes by, because it's so difficult in trying to figure out what to measure from. So water's edge, like our current ordinance says water's edge. And so I think a lot of places use that, but then they've just found, well, what's the water's edge? So then the high water mark on the inland lakes, a lot of the high water mark is more about vegetation,
Yeah.
than an elevation, because a lot of the lakes don't have elevations, which can also be difficult because then you have to have somebody that has a little bit of knowledge about different grasses to do that. Or if it's permanent, a tree doesn't typically grow in the water, so that's a good spot. But I don't know if I'm not sure.
Well, and I guess it doesn't really matter. I just started reading more and more about high water mark and earlier than this in planning commission meetings, they brought it up. And I didn't ask the question because I didn't want to appear too stupid, but
Well, I'm
The,
fixing to appear real stupid because, okay.
the fact that the water levels are affected totally different than the Great Lakes. It's just, I just never heard the term high water mark used, and we got in a lot of issues over high water marks on the bay, which is where a lot of the problems with high water marks is caused. And the only time on Torch Lake, the only time that water level differed much was that rain dump we got this past year. Well, all of a sudden the dock was floating, but it only lasted for a little while. Anyway, I didn't mean to take up, I just needed to clarify that because It can be a huge issue with people, depending on what you're dealing with, so especially with setback stuff. Okay,
Can we explore high water mark a little bit further? So even on the Great Lakes, I am not clear. I don't understand because the dunes and the sand shift so much that I know it's an elevation, but your land elevation, dunes, everything changes from year to year. So it seems to me that what might be a high water mark at one point in time could totally change. Like when a dune totally shears off, if it's in front of your house, now all of a sudden, is that sheared dune your high water mark when you built to, the dune was way out here before? Then it changes your setback. It changes, that's why
Yeah,
I need clarity on how you actually mark it where it's a fixed spot, because the dunes build up.
doesn't the high water mark mean exactly that?
And if it's an
Where's the high water mark?
well, it changes.
You
That's
know,
what
if
I'm
it's
saying.
If it's at X point, it traditionally, as the Corps of Engineers would determine that high water mark, then it doesn't matter where the water is 2 years later, the high water mark is still up where it's determined to be.
but she's
Then-
talking about if the ground elevation changes,
Right.
it
which
could
does
change your high water
substantially.
mark.
I figured I would call in somebody to tell me where it is, and I don't have to care. The person that's qualified will tell me where it is, and that's the end of the story. And I like that.
You know, if the dune falls away, you wouldn't lose anything because, you know, the elevation's still down somewhere here in the water. It would be if the dune moves closer to the water and gets into the water,
No,
then
the water
you,
comes into the dune.
Right.
I mean, the dune shears. So
but,
the water may go like this around the dune. Your property is right here.
mhm,
And then this dune shears away.
mhm,
Now your water, now that elevation is all of a sudden here instead of way out here.
yeah,
Or in
yeah,
the case of my property, you know, the water was so low for a while that all this really crappy vegetation started spreading down the beach. The sand, would catch the sand and it built up a great big dune that, I think when I bought the house, I think that the high water mark was staked there because there was this dune way out in front of my house. But it was a temporary, you know, the water
Right.
changes, shifts.
Yeah.
So the land changes. It's not that the water, I know the water, we're talking about, well, this is the highest level of the water, but if the land around that changes, or a big dune
right.
builds up,
Well, and it's similar to, you know, if somebody puts in a break wall that changes the sand around you, you know,
right,
and how the shoreline looks.
right. So I'm concerned about that only because, mostly because of the overlay district now, because that really kind of affects almost every resident, or 50% of the residents in our county. I mean, Torch Lake doesn't change that much, but Lake Michigan does. And what you think is, you know, 50 feet of property could be gone tomorrow, or you could have 50 more the next, you know,
Right.
2 years from now.
Yeah.
So let me ask a question. For fences in this particular section, are we talking about fences in general, for instance, in the village or people not on the water? And is fencing associated with the water different? That we would need two separate sections?
The only difference in this part of it is that they can be 8 feet everywhere, except for they can only be 4 feet within 50 feet of the high water mark. So the height difference within the high water mark. And then if you are within the 50 feet of the high water mark, item D here, they have to be 40% be able to see through.
So the question is, can you take a fence down to the high water mark point?
Yes.
Because I thought that you can't do that on the lake side, the bay side, because you can't restrict the access of people walking on the beach.
They can only walk below the high water mark. They don't have rights to walk above the high water mark.
But when the water goes above the high water mark,
You gotta
You're
walk
talking
in the
about the
water.
bay now.
Yeah.
yeah, because I don't think on Torch you can walk.
Yeah, Torch
along
is
the
not like
shoreline.
that. You don't have those riparian rights.
Right.
But yeah, if the water is low, they could walk on your beach, but if the water's high, they gotta walk in the water. Not that anybody knows exactly where if you have your elevation marked, I suppose, but.
All right.
But who knows where that is?
Right. So this does allow for fencing to go down to the high water mark, which is how I read the current one to say the same thing, except for that it can't be a solid fence. So you could put a chain link down to the water in this ordinance, but you could not put a wood privacy.
I have a feeling this is going to have a lot more discussion at the planning commission.
Yeah. And that would be great because I can find the current fencing section to be unusable.
Okay.
It's very difficult to deal with, I find. So, 2.21 refuse receptacles. These are, garbage cans, garbage containers. These are only for 4 dwelling units or more. They're meant to deal with dumpsters. Bob and I talked about totes, rolling totes for, single family dwellings and that. And I don't know if that's something we can regulate or not. I'd have to talk with the attorney about any kind of screening or if people need to remove their totes from the road or not leave them at the end.
My point was primarily US 31 and M88, because when visitors come by and drive through our community and they see garbage cans there day in and day out, my question is that, is that really what we want the community to look like to the public driving through it? It was just my thought. And my opinion was it was only related to those 2 roads, US 31 and 88. The side streets, that's not the main thoroughfare. But I can see that Sarah didn't think very much of that idea because it's not in here.
We talked about that after this was already out.
So I don't know, what do you think?
I don't care. I'm just driving somewhere on those
Yeah.
roads. I'm just getting to where I'm getting. I'm
All
not
right.
watching who's lazy or not taking care of the, whose husband didn't take the trash in.
All right, I'll talk to the planning commission.
I guess he's not getting anywhere with us, huh?
I did have that one on C. This doesn't
Yes.
apply to the temporary ones, right?
Yeah, so C would not so up in item A, the second sentence talks about an exception for temporary dumpsters. So I will make a note up there that screening and location would not apply to a temporary dumpster for construction or something like that. 2.22 recreational vehicles. So this is the language that we just adopted that came over to the new ordinance related to recreational vehicles, how long you can stay in them on your property and whatnot.
Is this a little bit different? I feel like it was different.
I
I didn't go back and compare.
the storage might be a little bit more. I don't know. I thought I did a complete copy and paste.
I compared, I thought it was pretty much the same.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that this will come back up. You mentioned that, Laura, that it will likely come back up at the planning commission. Who, how, what, and when that happens. 2.23 outdoor storage.
Well, you'll go back
Yeah.
to B, on a temporary occupancy of a RV,
Mhm.
the zoning permit is required.
Yeah,
Is that in our current ordinance?
yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty recent.
It is recent. So the old ordinance before the amendment, there was not a lot of language related to it. But permits were being issued. So as a part of this amendment, which just happened in May, maybe, we added that in because permits had been issued in the past.
Okay.
We did this based on the Memorial Day,
To clarify,
to clarify what
Yeah.
the air park was going to have for that Memorial Day activity.
yeah. So we had been doing permits, but the ordinance didn't say the permits.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I can't wait for it to come up again. To
Yeah.
Get a chance to discuss it more.
yeah,
Because it seems weird to me that, when we have a temporary dwelling, an RV someplace, and we want to make sure that you've got septic and water, but here, don't plug it in, please don't plug it in.
mhm.
It just
Yeah.
seems weird.
This is a hard one. Recreational vehicles is just, it's a tough topic because you either allow them or you don't allow them. And then not everyone's happy with whatever decision you make,
Yeah.
so. Outdoor storage is not allowed. Clear vision areas, this is some new language in the ordinance related to, corners to keep them open. I don't know if anybody has any issues with that. I think that it's nice because we do for especially coming out on intersections and items
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, can we get snow plows to observe the same?
I know. Some of those corners are so bad. Yeah. Water and disposal, water and septic, that makes sense. Hazardous substances. Makes sense. Performance standards. Everything has to be nice, not trespass. 2.28 animals. So this has to do with farm animals, bigger animals. This is what's in the current ordinance for the keeping of animals. It's worded a little bit different in the current ordinance because we did have, that came up as kind of a question, exactly what was meant by that. So you're allowed in the ag R1 and R2 to have livestock on 5 acres or greater.
What, instead of saying poultry, pigs, horses, and other livestock, why not just say any livestock?
We could say that. I think you should call out, I could write a definition for livestock in the ordinance that would say, because some people don't think of chickens as like livestock, but I mean, they are, but
If it's not stated in here, then so for instance, if somebody wanted to bring in 10 heads of cattle,
mhm,
could they bring in 10 heads of cattle on a 5-acre lot?
yes,
As long as it was 200 feet wide.
right.
That'd be a lot of heads of cattle.
So
there.
that actually disallows a good portion of the R1
Right.
Yeah.
'Cause-
properties.
yeah, and they don't have, a lot of R1 doesn't have 5 acres either.
Yeah.
There's maybe a couple, but all the lake property, just about all the lake properties would be out. All the village properties.
Yeah, I thought it was sad for people that, have 3 acres and they just want chickens.
Right. And we could write different language for chickens. I almost did. I almost put in a, keeping of chicken section because I think they've been more accepted recently to allow that either on smaller parcels. I did not do that because I didn't know how that would go over.
I am for it, but I got the impression that many people did not like it.
Yeah.
Really?
I don't know. There wasn't a whole lot of talk, but from the
No.
talk there was, I thought, oh gosh, glad I've got at least 5.
I think it should be considered,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you think there should be a minimum size on the keeping of chickens, the property for those?
Well, I think that 200 feet kind of eliminates almost everybody. There are, along the section of the lake that I live in, a lot of those houses have 10 acres. They're
Narrow.
narrow and deep. They're 150 feet wide. But there's plenty of land that it can be done. I guess you just have to consider the other, how far away it has to be from the property line and things like that, so it's
Yeah.
not,
Right. I mean, and we do, no roosters, if they're fencing, they should probably be fenced in if you're doing smaller properties. So they don't wander on, no trespassing of chickens.
I mean, I guess, how does our population really feel about it?
Right.
I'm only one person, so.
Well,
I know.
I don't.
Yeah.
I think it's a little restrictive.
Okay.
In
Well, I
my-
mean-
In my opinion.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely been more accepted. I'm kind of surprised there's no language in the ordinance that it didn't come up. It sounds like it did come up at one
Well,
time.
Someone had to get rid of their chickens because they didn't have enough land.
Yeah.
I think it
That was down the street here,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
I don't know who it was or anything, but yeah. Oh,
Did it bother, did
It
neighbors
was in the
complain or how
village.
did
I don't know how it came
it came
up.
up?
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well, there was a complaint filed,
Okay.
yeah, to the zoning administrator. I think that was a year ago.
Before me.
Yeah, it was before you.
I'm pretty sure if
But-
somebody's chicken gets on your land, it's yours, right? So don't complain, just take it.
Right.
Chicken dinner.
Well,
All right.
I'll add some language in. It'll create a good discussion at the
Yeah.
planning commission level and
Give them options.
see what happens. I guess people don't find them as offensive as they used to. I mean, I used to have 50 chickens. I'm really not a good person to talk about chickens with. But I also had 10 acres for my 50 chickens. So
Right.
2.29 just talks about the Right to Farm Act. 230, the removal of topsoil, so you can't just strip the property. And then medical use of marijuana. This just says if you're, under the medical licensing and as a caregiver, you can't notice it from the outside. No permit should be required. So this is a little bit different from our current ordinance and what we do for medical marijuana and caregivers. And the reason that I changed it is that a lot of that language, the courts have told us you can't regulate those things. So this is compliant with case law
Okay.
for caregivers. And those are getting phased out anyways. They just amended the law related to caregivers, and I can't remember. I think they reduced the number of plants, or there's even a more recent change to that. So it's more restrictive for caregivers.
Can I go up to 2.3? And what is this
Which one?
2.3?
Mm-hmm.
Strip excavator. otherwise removed.
Conflicting regulations?
And the mining or removal of
Oh.
topsoil. I mean,
You don't like the language?
I don't know. I did just is it saying that if I want to remove some topsoil from my land and give it to my buddy, I can't? Or
Well, I mean, probably not. I mean, technically, if you were to read this, it'd say, yes, you can't do that. But, if you're going to do that, if you probably don't have enough topsoil to make it an issue, I guess the issue would be if you have 10 acres and you're going to remove all the topsoil and just leave it.
okay,
You're going to get caught up with soil erosion more than you're going to get caught up with us if you remove the topsoil. Especially if you don't replant it.
gotcha.
But that's in Article 6, right?
Yeah.
Okay, ready to move on to Article 10?
Yep.
Okay, nonconformities. Like I mentioned, a lot of this language does currently exist in the ordinance because we just amended this section to try to help us out. So, so I don't know exactly how, if you want to just walk through, I guess we walk through it just like we have the other ones. So general standards talks about items can be continued, ownership can change. The land use permits talks about, there's a period of time. So technically, when we adopt a new ordinance, any land use permit that you have outstanding ends up being invalidated, and they'd have to come back in and apply for another permit under the new ordinance. So Section C just allows those permits to continue after the ordinance is adopted. So you don't have that hard cutoff. It's just a more natural, like how it exists today, after a certain amount of time. So the only thing is that should say zoning permit instead of land use permit.
Where's
So you're-
that?
C, 10.2C.
And that's probably an issue throughout this section, because I copied and pasted from our current to here.
But it's, so if somebody was in the 11th month of their permit and we changed the ordinance to something different, they get another 12 months.
No, it's valid under the same terms as that original permit. So they would have to, because that in the second sentence, where it says ordinance and any subsequent amendment shall be valid in accordance with its terms, even if not conforming with provision of this ordinance.
Yeah, provided that construction is commenced within 12 months after the date of the permitted
Right.
issuance.
So the 12 months after when the permit was issued,
All
it
right.
proceeds towards
So if it
completion.
was 11 months, they still only have 1 month to get it done.
Right.
Or they fall underneath the new ordinance.
Or they would still be eligible to apply for an extension based on that permit?
Right, because that's what the new ordinance says, so they could get an extension on it, as long as they're working towards it, if they
Working
haven't
towards
started.
it, couldn't get the lumber for 3 months
Right.
or whatever.
Yeah. So this is trying to minimize that time. I don't, there may be some situations where somebody wouldn't be eligible for a new permit, but I think in most cases, any permits that are out there would be able to be reapplied for anyways. But this is just to keep everything above board, so it's not that, all these permits are bad, even if you got one a month ago and now you have to come back and reapply, because that tends to make people not too happy if they just got a permit and have to come back again.
And we charge them for it.
Exactly. Yeah, I would prefer not to deal with that. Yes. So, and it does allow for the strengthening and restoration to a safe condition of any building. So 10.3 talks about non-conforming uses. That's the use of the property. So if there's a commercial and a residential district, for instance, that use can continue. Can't be enlarged. There is an opportunity to expand. Item B talks about a conforming structure. So that would be any structure that does, it's not sitting in the setback or something like that.
I have a number of questions here. So specifically in B, non-conforming use, so the ZBA still has authority even though there's a not, okay.
Is that under A or B?
Under B, but then there's also other places like C2. Non-conforming use may be changed to another non-conforming use if approved by the ZBA.
Yeah.
I didn't think the ZBA had authority over use.
They can't grant a use variance, but this is not technically a use variance. But I'll double check with Todd on that, with the attorney, just to make sure. It's not a disguised use variance.
Pardon? It's not a
Disguised, we're not calling it that, but that's what we're actually doing.
Because you're changing from non-conforming.
Yeah, non-conforming to
seemed-
non-conforming. Yeah, I mean, that's what I could see. I can see your argument that it could be a use variance because it's non-conforming. which means it's not allowed in that district. Yeah. That's why I'll ask Todd about it.
My theory is two wrongs don't make a right.
Right. Yeah.
So it would be required to get another use
Mm-hmm.
variance.
Mm-hmm. I can see what you're saying.
Could you give me an example of a conforming structure in which a non-conforming use is operated?
So a house that is in the commercial district, but the house meets all the setbacks. So we would say that the house that is conforming because it meets all the setbacks. And then the use would be, where'd that section go? So say you're using it as a single family dwelling, because we don't allow dwellings in the commercial district. So you could say there was an office in it and now they wanted to
Okay.
change that into dwelling area 2 and take the commercial operation out of it.
Okay.
It's highly unlikely that that clause would ever come into effect, but. And then section 3 here under C, that 10.3C3, that's new to try to help the zoning board of appeals get through their decision-making, gives them some standards. They have to make findings that support each of those to be able to approve the enlargement or expansion.
So you're assigning them finding the fact parameters.
Right.
Is that on top of the other 4?
Well, that would be, the other 4 are for a dimensional variance.
Right.
So this would be that's why this is really something that I haven't seen in action.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's good, assuming that it is really under the
Yeah.
authority of the zoning board.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing, because a lot of times non-conforming uses are like in no man's land where you've got this non-conforming section. It says you can't do anything with it, but you want to be able to do something with it. And then they end up in front of the ZBA and the ZBA is like, well, we have no standards. We don't know how to deal with it, or we can't grant it because it's non-conforming and we don't have the power. So this is trying to help the zoning board of appeals through that, hopefully, for doing that. Because a lot of times those are the buildings you're dealing with anyways at the ZBA, they show up and they want a variance for a setback, and it's because it's an existing building that already sits in the setback or something like that. And it used to be worse because our ordinance, now the ordinance reads, if you have a structure and it sits too close to the water, it's in the waterfront setback, as long as the addition meets the setbacks, you don't have to go to the ZBA. Where before it was more, the building's non-conforming, it sits in the setback, go see the ZBA, even though the addition completely complies with the ordinance. So this, I don't know how frequently the ZBA will even run into this part of the ordinance.
Right.
So. And then abandonment, item D. Abandonment's really difficult to deal with, which is why there's all these different ways to tell if somebody's abandoned use. There's lots of case law over it, and it's still muddy and murky as ever. So, 10.4 talks about non-conforming sites. This is something, I don't recall if it's in our current ordinance or not. If it was, it is not really applicable currently. But this section will come into play mostly with some of the design standards that the Planning Commission has proposed for the village, business, and commercial districts. So a non-conforming site may be a site that doesn't have all of its landscaping or something like that. We may run into a lot of this with dumpsters.
With what?
dumpsters.
Oh.
Because in our current ordinance, we don't have any dumpster screening requirements, and now we're putting in dumpster screening requirements. So if somebody comes in and changes the use of the property or wants to expand, they would have to bring that component into, upgrade it to meet the current ordinance. So this kind of talks about that part of it, when you're talking about a non-conforming site.
Okay, so C, you intended that not to say extensions, but expansions?
Under abandonment,
Oh, I thought we were on non-conforming sites.
yeah, we are.
10-4 C.
C, yeah.
Yes.
And then, and when you say non-conforming site on which there is a conforming use, shall not be expanded or contracted. Just, wasn't real clear. Are you talking about expanding or contracting the use of that, or are you talking about a dimensional change in structures? I wasn't quite clear what was being expanded or contracted.
You know, that's, expanded,
The site is, I
Yeah.
think technically as this reads, it would mean the site is being expanded or contracted, but
let me take another stab at the language. I mean, it's,
sure, are you making a lot bigger or?
well, any, like, kind of any change, it's kind of like any change you make to the lot or to the structure or to anything would mean that it has to be compliant. But it doesn't really read like that.
Okay.
So let me take another stab at that. So, and then E does allow, so if there's no exterior changes, a new use could go in to that structure. So 10.5 talks about non-conforming structures. We talked a little bit about those. So, you know, they can continue in any way. You can repair them. You can replace them if it's a natural cause.
So I have an issue on this one too. In the beginning, we say the intent is not to encourage their survival, yet we allow for if it's completely destroyed, for it to be rebuilt. So I think that's inconsistent.
Right. It's very generous to allow, if a whole structure is destroyed, for the whole structure to be rebuilt. That's a generous way to apply non-conformings. So there's nothing wrong with that, though. I mean, if that's what the community wants. So I can change the beginning to talk about, maybe I can just remove, but not to encourage their survival.
You're talking about making changes to B or?
Up into 10.1.
Oh.
10.1 comes out kind of strong, and then as you go through the article, it gets easier, kind of, you know, like, so, you know, maybe I'll do that.
And then I was just curious, so if you go down to 10.5 D2, be enlarged. Okay, so it's saying you can enlarge with approval of the zoning administrator. Any if it meets the following, any expansion will result in the structure being more conforming to the requirements of this ordinance. But in 10.5C, you can't increase the original usable floor area. And I was wondering if that.
So if, could you apply C and D at the same time?
Well, they seem to be maybe contrary. I'm wondering if I'm just not understanding the circumstances where one would apply over the other.
Well, C would only apply if it were damaged, naturally damaged. And then D would apply if you wanted to just add on to the structure.
So that just seems inconsistent to me, I guess, in context of, well, do we want to be lenient or not? If you would allow somebody to expand a non-conforming structure, assuming that it becomes more conforming, then if they're rebuilding it, why wouldn't you allow them to expand it, the original footprint to become more conforming if it was totally destroyed?
You would though still, right?
Well, I'm not
You wouldn't
sure.
have to, but you could.
Well, it says replacement of a damaged non-conforming structure, the last sentence, does not increase the original usable floor area or volume of such structure, yet you allow later for the enlargement of a non-conforming structure.
Yeah, so that D enlargement came from the existing ordinance before it was amended recently to add the nonconformities in there. I understand what you're saying. I'm trying to think of a tactful way to say this.
Just say it.
It's
So,
more fun if you're not.
yeah, item C, if your house is damaged and it's non-conforming, you're kind of penalized because you want to rebuild in the same spot. So as drafted, your whole house is gone, so you should be able to meet all the setbacks and you could build whatever you want. But if you don't want to do that and you want to build on the same foundation, you don't get the luxury of building bigger or doing something different because you have the opportunity now to build and meet your setbacks, for instance.
Oh, that's a good explanation.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, but if they, at the same time, if you rebuild your house that sits in the setback and 2 years goes by and you want to put an addition on it and the addition meets the setback requirements, you could pull a permit to do that. So it's kind of just time. It's kind of like, is government just getting in the way of you doing what you want to do?
When you want to do it.
Right.
Oh.
But why should you be able to rebuild in the setback, and build bigger if you're not meeting the setback? I don't know.
Yeah, but that's the key aspect though, that if you want to rebuild on the same footprint, it's like if you want to tear down and rebuild on a 50-foot lot, non-conforming, you're going to put that in the same footprint on a non-conforming basis, and you go up 2 stories. And that's no different whether you want to tear down and rebuild or if it's destroyed.
Right. There is a little bit of sympathy because it's been destroyed. You didn't cause that issue. Hopefully you didn't cause your house to burn down. But even if you did, you left your oily rags someplace and they caught fire. Technically, for non-conforming, you could rebuild it. We're kind of sympathetic towards it. You don't want to penalize them, but at the same
Yeah,
time,
but you're not expanding the non-conformity.
right.
That's always been the thing. If you want to adjust a non-conforming building, you can't create more non-conformity with that construction.
Right.
So if they're building within the same footprint, you are doing exactly what you have said. You haven't increased the non-conformity, therefore you have penalized.
So, but what if you wanted to add on that was conforming then. And I think that's, what Laura kind of was saying. If you want to build on your same footprint, but put an addition on the side of the house that meets all the setbacks,
But that,
should you be able to do that?
yeah, we had a case on that. That was that piece of property on the bay. It was an old cottage. It was in the front setback. It was 25, 30 feet from the lake. And what they did was they built on the back of it and expanded and kept it within all the appropriate setbacks. And they expanded the use of that. But they did it in a conforming fashion without expanding the non-conformity of the original cottage. So why wouldn't you let people do that?
Well,
If it
they,
if it burnt down.
Well, even if it burnt down.
Right.
Right, so that's why
right.
you're giving a rationale for why you'd be a little more punitive towards one than the other.
And I don't agree with that rationale.
But.
Right.
Well, and that was
So the
that was my
we-
original question.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's a good discussion because I think that from appearances, if you don't understand that rationale, it looks inconsistent.
Right. But from what I'm hearing is that language may not be appropriate. That's not the actual policy that we want to set. So if that small cottage that was in the front water setback burned down and they came in and they wanted to rebuild it, they could rebuild it in that same location and put an addition on it all at the same time.
Because the addition is now conforming.
Mm-hmm.
You have, now, if they come in and they want to make it non-conforming,
Right.
then that would be a no-go.
Right.
Because now you've expanded the non-conformance of that property.
But if that house burnt down, why couldn't they just build it to meet the setbacks? Why do they get the bonus of building in the water setback and build their
Yeah,
addition?
that's exactly what I'm thinking. That sounds like, ooh, lucky me, my house burnt down, I get extra space.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I look at it, okay, somebody can afford to tear down a house there on Torch that's on a 50-foot lot and rebuild it and go up 3 stories and stay within the height requirements, but they get a new building. But they used the existing footprint, it did not. See, I think my whole thing is it doesn't matter as long as you don't increase the nonconformity as to how you get there. Whether it burns down, whether you want to demolish it and start over. I mean, how many houses do we have on Torch that were torn down and they used the same footprint and went up?
Okay, but I think there's a little difference if the lot is non-conforming versus the structure is
Right.
non-conforming. And what you're saying is the non-conformity was the lot.
Right.
Well, but the structure was in
The house
setback.
on the lot.
The house was on the lot.
Yeah, but I mean, the house, the house is what was non-conforming on the lot. It's a
Well, both were,
non-conforming
it's a
lot.
non-conforming lot and they were in the setbacks
In
as
the
well.
setback because at that point there were no ordinances for the setback. I mean, the place was 40 years old or something. I'm just saying what I'm trying to get is maybe a balance of some sort. Because if somebody buys a house that's non-conforming on a lot, do you want to differentiate the house versus the lot? Or are you trying to differentiate the conformity and non-conformity? Because if we're looking at trying to not change, but improve or whatever, we ought to be able to encourage people if they want to do that, to change things out as long as they don't make it more non-conforming, whatever the basis is. Because it really doesn't matter if you stay in the footprint, whether it was the building or not, you're keeping the footprint. Therefore, whatever the non-conformity is not expanded.
The lot's always gonna be non-conforming no what you do.
Right.
It's a 50-foot lot.
And
So the whole issue is the building on the lot.
And
Right.
if the building is not conforming because of what? It's in the setback.
Right.
So it's as long as
I didn't mean to go down that.
going down,
I just keep,
So do you want to encourage them to build a more conforming house?
No,
If
no.
they're tearing it down, or you're,
No, what I'm saying is that if they want to improve the house, because we don't have that much property, so if they want to come in and improve the house and keep it on the same footprint, they haven't created any more nonconformity by doing it. Then if they want to add within that lot a conforming structure to the setbacks, even though it's a non-conforming lot, as long as you stay with it outside or outside of those setbacks, you could add something to it.
I
The
agree.
idea is giving people the option to improve the piece of property. That's,
Okay, so you're saying that they can, if there's a cottage, they can tear it down, they can rebuild it, and they can make it higher no matter where it sits on their lot.
right, as long as
As long
it's
as
the
it's in the
same
footprint. And they can add on to that footprint as long as the addition conforms with all the setbacks.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why would you not want to encourage people?
Well,
to do
so what about a boathouse that sits on the water, close to the water? And now that person can tear down an old boathouse, rebuild it, and build it taller to meet the
Well,
height
If I
restrictions.
look at a boat, you're talking about a boathouse in which they drive their boat in?
No, not that far. Just, kind of like a lakeside accessory building. Because I'm sure we have some that are kind of garages or people walked out on top of them or use them.
Well, is that their
Yeah.
primary residence? Or is
This
it a
would be an
garage?
accessory building, right?
Right, well, now you can make that exception if you wish.
Okay,
But my whole point is living a home,
a dwelling,
yeah.
so dwelling only.
I agree with you, but I also think that the boathouse brings up a whole nother issue.
Well, but you could limit it to the dwelling.
Right.
So, okay, I mean, the only concern I would have is that, as a nonconformity, we try to get rid of them. So if somebody is actively removing a structure, say it's 5 feet from the property line, on the property line, we're trying to get them to meet those setbacks. So you're giving the person, you're not requiring them to move to be any more conforming if they tear it down and then rebuild it. Which is okay. I mean, that's okay. You may have a situation. I just don't have a good example. You may have a situation of something that's really not good. Somebody doesn't like, shouldn't be that way. And now people can tear down this old building that's falling apart and rebuild it. So it will never go away. It will never become closer to conforming because you can tear it down and rebuild it and make it taller.
Yeah.
So you
So
could
we-
say something, if it's like 5 foot of the setback or something, maybe you could rebuild it. But if it's on the property line, you don't want to be able to fully rebuild it.
or what about these little cottages that are right down by the water too?
Right.
Tiny, they're non-conforming because they're too small. They don't meet the 960 foot
Square feet.
square feet.
But they're
Um,
also in the waterfront setback.
And they're also in the waterfront setback. I mean, and they're very old.
Okay.
Do
But
do
they,
we really want to allow somebody to tear that down and rebuild it right where it is?
We have two opinions, let the PC work through it,
okay,
because we're not gonna
Right.
settle it here.
right.
No, I don't think we should. I think we
No,
should discuss it here though, because.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing is what's the policy for nonconformities? There's not a right answer. It's whatever's right for the community.
I mean, yeah, if you go down on the bay, and that one road, I forget the name of that road down there, and you go there and they're stacked up on 50-foot lots. But if somebody wanted to go in there and remodel a place, right? I mean, even tear it down, because people can remodel without tearing down, So it's just, it is what it is with what that can, what can be done today. I just want to give people opportunities to improve something without them trying to fit them into a different box. And that's just my thought on that. We spent a lot of time arguing through it, but on the other hand, if the PC wants to listen to the tape and see why we went around on this thing, they're going to do the same thing.
Yeah, it probably should be thought through
Yeah.
extensively.
Yep.
Question?
So I made a note there that we'll bring that up at the planning commission level and let them hash their way through it. And so then 10.6 non-conforming lots, this basically says that you can build on a non-conforming lot as long as it meets the setbacks with no issue, any use, anything like that.
Okay, because I didn't understand that at all.
Yeah, I did not either. I read it so
I
many
read it
times.
so
I'm
many
like,
times.
I give up.
So maybe that could be reworded, because you
Yes.
said that very simply. And
I can do that.
I even read it to my dog.
The dog said, sounds good to me.
Okay, so that's all that I have for those sections. So on to the next.
Well, now
Or,
we're 10
Us?
minutes short of our 2
Okay.
hours, so.
Well, I don't think we want to get into zoning.
No.
because That's
No.
going to be a little,
that's going to be a
Exciting.
long.
Perfect.
who you
Well,
ask Laura
let's
to
work on our
say
next meeting then.
Can you
initial?
answer for me though, just when looking at the table,
Uh-huh.
like what am I looking at as far as if I don't see anything in a row,
Yeah,
that means
it's not allowed.
okay. All right.
So if there's nothing in there, it's not allowed. If it says ZA, I mentioned this with Laura before, our current ordinance in the commercial district only allows for the zoning administrator to approve some uses. They still have to have a full site plan. They still have to meet the standards of the ordinance, but it's administratively approved instead of going to the planning commission.
Okay.
Which is it's interesting that it's only in that one district with those couple of things. So I guess think about if you want to expand the abilities of the zoning administrator, or if you want to be consistent to like the village business and just make it all go to the planning commission.
Well,
So.
I'll use a couple minutes. Page 4, 5, 6. When you look at Article 3, when we get to page 4, 5, and 6,
what are we looking at? The zoning?
yeah, the Article 3 zoning.
3.22 and
Yeah,
Okay.
3.22.
3.3.
Yeah, I get the one, the dimensional standards, the landscaping and fencing, is that purposely left blank, or is that?
Yeah, because I didn't know how the other sections in the ordinance were gonna come out to be able to put those requirements in there.
So that answers my question.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those were intentionally left blank to be filled in, and we may have some discussion about it because you may tell me in the ag district, even if it's commercial, I don't want you to require any landscaping. So think about some of that too, that this would only apply to commercial operations, landscaping, and as far as being a requirement and buffering, that would not apply to like a single family dwelling or something like that.
All right, so the next item on our agenda is setting up our next meeting date.
Let me look at my calendar.
And given how Sarah has now booked herself solid for the next 5 months, we are almost at her mercy at this point. I have to discuss that with her.
Booked solid. So I have January 6th, which is a Thursday,
So, 5th,
6th.
6th?
That's open. Or January 20th, which is a Thursday.
So I can't do the 6th, but I can do the 20th.
I'm good with either one, I believe. Thursdays are good for me,
Okay.
not for you.
No. Do you have something, a standing Thursday night?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
my
Yep.
spinning class.
Well, I'm not doing anything here without you.
I mean,
And then the last week of the month, I don't know if I'm gonna have, well, you're busy Monday nights too, so that doesn't help for that.
well, I can do a Thursday or a Monday.
You know, the only other,
You know, I just.
the other
don't do it,
thing we
that's all.
could do, well, I was gonna say, we have the ZBA on the 19th, and that'll be a really short meeting.
You can't be doing it January 19th?
Yeah,
That's a Wednesday.
it's a Wednesday, because I was thinking
Oh,
maybe
that's
we
right.
could meet and
Can
then,
we start earlier? Because the ZBA, or do you want to
Does-
start at,
7,
the
Yeah.
ZBA starts at 7.
yeah. Laura's,
Laura's got work, that's.
yeah.
Yeah, like on the
So we have
20th,
to
I'm
do
gonna be in
it later.
Detroit,
Is there,
so.
is it possible to move the ZBA meeting up a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, if we could move the ZBA, even if we could move the ZBA up to 5:30, 6 o'clock, and then we could meet here at 6:15, like normal, because you're just approving minutes at that meeting.
Right. I was going to
Yeah.
ask you if we have any variances or
No.
anything coming up.
Can
So
you do a special ZBI meeting?
Yeah, we could do it on a different night, or just,
Yeah.
we just move it up that night, I think is.
You could do a special meeting.
And what day is that?
Okay.
Are you available Thursday or Wednesday, the 19th, or no?
I don't, it looks like it. There's a location of Wisconsin for a meeting, but I didn't make plans to go to Wisconsin, so I'm gonna say yes.
Yeah. Because we can work the ZBA, because that, like I said, is just going to be a quick meeting.
So January 19th
Yep,
at
6:15.
6:15.
19th.
19th. I'll send a quick email out tomorrow. That way you can put it in your calendar, Lee.
Okay, so Sarah, do you want me to contact the ZBA members or do you want to
I
do
will.
that? Okay.
We'll see if they could just move it up a
See if
little
they can
bit.
just move it up a little bit because otherwise, I mean, if we try to, well, I guess since it's just approval of minutes, it doesn't matter if you can be there or not. If they can't move it up, we'll find it.
And you only need a quorum.
Yeah.
Just grab 3 people out of the office. No,
Yeah.
just kidding. I'm on tape. I got to be careful.
So yeah, we'll work on that ZBA meeting. I'm hopeful that people will be able just to move it up a little bit.
All right. So we'll just set meetings then going forward, one at a time.
Is that, do you want to do that, or do you want to get another one a couple weeks out?
That's fine. It's, I mean, from what I see, probably the next meeting is, we may not get through all of those items in the next meeting, especially number 6.
Right.
So
Mondays and Thursdays.
do it, what about February? So that's the 19th. What about February 10th?
What day is that?
That's Thursday.
Okay.
I'll-
Oh, you're
I'll-
gonna,
Wait, I thought you.
what about, well, you want to do it on a Thursday?
I can sacrifice.
Okay. Then,
I don't get.
I could
paid
do
for
it on the
teaching,
3rd. I could do it on the 3rd, Thursday the 3rd.
Thursday the 3rd. All right.
What day is
That's
that?
fine.
Thursday the
Thursday,
3rd, February
so, yeah.
3rd.
Yep.
Okay.
That's fine.
Let's do those two.
And then I will be out for surgery the week, well, right now it's the week of the 9th of March. And it might be the 16th. But on the 15th, I've got the annual meeting and the regular board meeting. So
Okay.
I prefer not to meet the week of the 7th of March.
Of March, okay. Let's see what else I've got here.
You know, we could meet March 3rd. That's a Wednesday and there aren't any meetings on that day.
I have March 3rd as a Thursday.
Thursday, March 2nd is a
Oh,
Wednesday.
March 2nd.
Right. What about,
We're talking the second or the third now?
well, we don't know.
We're not sure yet.
What
I
about,
threw out the wrong date.
yeah. So I can do the 3rd.
How about the second?
I cannot do the 2nd. No, probably not. But I can do the 28th, February 28th, that Monday. I know, I'm
Killing me.
killing you, aren't I? Let me see,
Come on.
let me look in February and see if I have any dates that are not a Monday or a Thursday. Those are not
What about
popular
the
meeting days.
22nd or 23rd?
23rd of February
Yeah,
or 23rd of March?
no, 22nd, 23rd of February.
23rd of February, I have available.
You are?
Yes.
All right. Anybody else?
I look good on both days.
Yeah.
All right,
So which do you want, 22nd or 23rd?
23rd.
23rd. So we have January 19th at 6:15, February 3rd at 6:15, and February 23rd at 6:15. And I will make sure I get it on the calendar
Oh, yeah, in there.
in the
Wait,
in
what
the
was the
office.
third one? February 20,
3rd,
what day is that?
Wednesday.
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 I know you have all that consulting work you're doing.
Well, actually, right in the middle of February, I do have a board meeting in Lansing I have to go to on a Wednesday. I don't know what day it is yet. I didn't bring my calendar. But I
I'll
think
send
the
an email.
23rd is, I'm pretty sure it's the week before that, but
Okay.
I'll double check.
All right, so we're set for 3 meetings. You're set with the work you need to do.
Yeah.
Next item, public comment. We still have no public, so there still aren't any comments. I'll make the motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned at 8:12.
Hey, Sarah. I was really sad that it was my fault for not looking sooner. No Word document.